Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. We are reissuing the Revelation series that was taught by Rabbi Jim Pickens here at Beth Yeshua over the course of the last 2 years or so. We feel these messages are especially relevant in these tumultuous times, and we hope and pray that Adonai uses them to strengthen you and to encourage you. If you are currently a supporter of this ministry, we would like to say thank you. We appreciate your partnership with us as we all labor together in the work of the gospel of Yeshua in the kingdom here on earth. If you would like to support us, you will find a link below in the video description. Once again, we hope that this is a blessing to you. If you have any questions, you will find an email address. If you have any dialogue or discussion, you'll find an email address in the video description below. Please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And now I will give you the Revelation series with Rabbi Jim Pickens. Shalom.
All right. Tonight, our goal is to finish Revelation chapter 4. We got through verse number 7 last time, and since we broke off in the middle of discussion of the four living creatures, I'd like to start by going and doing a quick review of the information in Revelation 4, 6, and 7. So if you would put that up, we're beginning about in the middle of verse 6. It says, "In the center, around the throne, were four living beings covered with eyes in front and behind." We're going to see more about the eyes this evening. Verse 7, "The first living being was like a lion, the second being was like an ox, the third living being had a face like a human, and the fourth living being was like a flying eagle." The reason we're taking so much time really with all of this is a very important chapter because it prepares us for what follows. It really prepares us for what follows, the days that are to come, if you will. Conceivably, these days could fall on us at any time, so this would prepare us, giving us an insight into things as they really are instead of what they appear to be, perhaps even instead of what some of the theologies are projecting. Particularly as portrayed in our news media, things are given to us that don't always add up when we look back at them historically. Anyhow, the four living beings are covered with eyes front and back. Everything is seen. Nothing takes place that escapes detection by the throne of God. These four living beings are the seraphim. They're always around the throne of God, always in the presence of God. The description is like but different from the description of Ezekiel chapter number 1. But how exactly would physical man describe spiritual beings? From my experience as a police officer, I can tell you the descriptions of any event will vary according to the person who was seeing it. Any of the events seen by most people will pale when compared to coming into the throne room of God. So it's got to really jar people. Different people seeing the same four beings, and describing them with some variation would be an absolutely normal trait. The first living being was like a lion, the second like an ox, the third described only as having a face like a human. The fourth was like an eagle flying. All right, let's pick this up then, still in chapter 4, but verse 8. "Each of the four living beings had 6 wings and was covered with eyes inside and out, and day and night they never stopped saying, 'Holy, holy, holy is Adonai, the God of heaven's armies, the one who was, who is, and who is coming.'" Interesting note on that. We note that the eyes are pointed out again, but I want to start with the wings. So I'm going to take you to Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. "In the year of King Uzziah's death, I," that would be Isaiah, I saw Adonai sitting on a high lofty throne. The hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphim stood over him, each with 6 wings, 2 for covering the face, 2 for covering his feet, and 2 for flying. And they were crying out to each other, "More holy than the holiest holiness is Adonai Tzevaot. The whole earth is filled with his glory." As an interesting note on that verse 3, Complete Jewish Bible translates "more holy than the holiest of holinesses." Gets 3 holies in. We have to see that. More holy than the holiest holiness. Most translations will just say holy, holy, holy. Complete Jewish Bible expands on the concept of that. More holy than the holiest holinesses. The only 2 places in all of Scripture where the 3 words of holy appear, the triple form of holy is used, are in Revelation 4:8 and Isaiah 6:3. Revelation 4:8 and Isaiah 6:3. The Hebrew of Isaiah 6:3 is simply Kadosh, 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 which translates holy, holy, holy. King Uzziah died in 740 BC. Isaiah would have been around 20 or 21 years old when he had this particular vision, and it's a significant vision, a vision of Adonai sitting on the throne. As we go through this lesson tonight, there are statements indicating who this one sitting on the throne is here in Revelation 4. The statements indicating that this is the Godhead being represented, God the Father, but that also being a merging of him taking place with Messiah. We've seen that merging taking place earlier and earlier. It's a kind of a blurring of a distinction that we saw earlier, and all of the Godhead ends up being one and the same. One of the interesting things, this Adonai in Isaiah 6, sitting on the throne, the hem of his robe filling the temple. What Isaiah saw is defined in John chapter 12, verse 41. So let's go there. We'll begin in verse 40, actually. One of the 2 who had heard John and had followed Yeshua was Andrew, the brother of Shimon Kepha. That's Peter. The first thing he did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We found the Mashiach." That word, Mashiach, is Messiah in English, means one who has been anointed. Isaiah 6:1-3 would be the only place in Isaiah that this could really be referring to. What Isaiah saw on the throne is essentially pre-incarnate Yeshua. I'm going to repeat that. What Isaiah saw on the throne is essentially pre-incarnate Yeshua. God the Father is invisible to human sight. We're not allowed to look upon him in toto. To look at him is to bring death. But Yeshua can be seen by us, and we're already told in Revelation 3:21 that because he has won the victory, Yeshua has sat down on the throne with his Father. That again is pointing to this merging of the 2. Remember that Yeshua was there before the foundations of the earth were laid, John chapter 1, verse 1, and Hebrews 1:10. So by deduction, Yeshua had the victory won before the foundations of the world were laid. And that's a neat concept, just if you think about it, that Yeshua had the victory won before the foundations of the world were laid. He still had to do it, but there it was. Then, eyes on the beings are mentioned again. I'm going to bring us back to Revelation 4:8, please. Each of the 4 living beings had 6 wings, was covered with eyes inside and out. See, that's a little different. Before we saw them, they had insides, front, and back. Here they have insides, inside, and out. And day and night they never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy is Adonai, the God of heaven's army, the one who was, who is, and who is coming." The eyes are described here being front and back. They're described as being inside and outside. here in Revelation 4:8, apparently emphasizing the all-seeing function of these eyes. No matter what happens, where it happens, in any form, these eyes see what's going on. No matter what direction it comes from, they see it, front or rear, inside or outside. And if we remember in Ezekiel 1 that there were 4 wheels with 4 living beings, and the wheels were covered with eyes. The wheels moved as the living beings moved, because the spirit of the living beings was in the wheels, the motion of the wheels. John doesn't mention the wheels, but we're getting a description of what is going on at the throne of God from a different person here. Some people think these beings are different here than in Ezekiel. I don't think so, because in essence God doesn't change. I think we're getting interpretation of the same thing from different persons, each having focused on aspects of the scene just a little bit differently because of the makeup of the personality. We're all wired differently. Both of these are trying to interpret what they saw for us. The living beings here are constantly calling out, "Holy, holy, holy, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh," is the God of heaven's army. The tripartite holy that we mentioned earlier when we were looking at Isaiah 6, 1 through 3, where holy is repeated 3 times, indicates absolute holiness. There can be none more pure than this. The fact that is repeated 3 times is really significant. Now we begin to see the relationship between the absolute authority that we noted earlier in the throne, in the center of everything and around it, and the absolute holiness. See, they're together now. We're beginning to see a relationship between the absolute authority and the absolute holiness. There's a relationship between absolute authority and absolute holiness. Chapter 4 begins a new phase of John's vision of the revelation. See, a door has been opened for him to cross over into heaven, and to this point, the vision in heaven had been visual. Here the first words are spoken, so we now have auditory input. And the first words spoken, we're harping on this, is kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. So now what we see is God with absolute authority, who is absolutely holy and worthy of continual praise day and night. Holy essentially means separate. To be holy is to be separated from. With the concept here being of total purity, not just standing to one side, but separate, totally separate, because of total purity. Remember the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector? This is how the Pharisee was trying to view himself, standing away from the crowd so none of what they had would rub off on him, lest he not be holy any longer. The word holy is separate, speaking of total purity. As the parable goes, the Pharisee failed to achieve this status by his own efforts, because only God can be holy of his own efforts. We can be made holy through the work of God, but we can't do it through our own works. Now, this someone on the throne is clearly identified as Adonai, the God of heaven's armies. So it becomes clear that the absolute authority and the absolute holiness is not with any man or any creature, but only really with God. Evil does not have any power in these heavenly realms. God of heaven's armies further defines the absolute authority. Look at what power is seen. Look at what power really, in this sense, is all about. We live in a nation, the United States, that is presumed to be the most powerful nation on the planet at this time, mostly by us, if you really are paying attention. But this country, in God's presence, has no power. How can I say that? Give you a couple of quick examples. Remember the plagues of Egypt? Well, Egypt was the world power of the time. They were the empire of the time, an extraordinary, powerful nation. To mess with them got you destroyed. Remember the last plague that was brought on them? One angel of God killed all the firstborn all over the nation and the firstborn of all animals of the nation, and they were powerless to stop it. One angel. Just one angel. One more example. Let's turn to Isaiah 37:36, please. Then the angel of Adonai went out and struck down 185,000 men in the camp of Asher. Early the next morning, there they were, all of them corpses, dead. Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, who was the power at that time, was encamped at Jerusalem, getting ready to lay siege to the city. And he had the wherewithal to do it. No problem, except that God had decided this was not going to happen. Again, just one angel of God strikes down 185,000 of his army. That's power. And that angel's still walking around untouched. We have to get our perspective straight, I believe. When we are talking about absolute power, this is the kind of power that we're talking about. So, the USA, is bigger than Egypt or Assyria, and we've got ICBMs and we've got nukes. Big deal. God's got more than one angel. God's power is not like the power that this nation holds. Now, the last phrase tells us that this someone sitting on the throne is the one who was, who is, and who is coming. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, we saw this same language. This language speaks to God himself or to the Godhead. And some people feel that this is an expansion of the name that was revealed to Moses in Exodus 3:13 through 15. Moses said to God, "Look, when I appear before the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? What am I to tell them?" God said to Moses, Eyah Asher Eyah, I am, will be what I am, will be. And added, here's what to say to the people of Israel. Eyeh, I am or I will be, has sent you. That may have broken it down more than some of your translations have to this point. That's from the Complete Jewish Bible. Note, Yod-He, Vav-He are only the consonants given to us of God's name. Only the consonants, Yod-He, Vav-He, in God's name are given to us. No vowels are given. That makes it impossible for us to pronounce it if we don't have the vowels to add to the consonants. Some people feel that what is said in Revelation 4:8 is an expansion of what is said in Exodus 3:13 through 15 of the personal name of God, expanded to who was, who is, and who is coming. Interestingly enough, it was very well understood what I am means. It means God in his fullest, in his most completeness. Look at John chapter 8, verse 56, please. Abraham, your father, was glad that he would see my day. Then he saw it and was overjoyed. Why, you're only 50 years old, the Judeans replied, and you have seen Abraham? Yeshua said to them, yes, indeed, before Abraham came into being, I am. At this they picked up stones to throw at him, but Yeshua was hidden and left the temple grounds. Yeshua said, I am. He identified himself as being this one that's being described as the one speaking to Moses, referring back to Exodus 3, staking his claim as to who he was. They would not have missed that one, those people that were in Jerusalem talking with Yeshua. In their minds, this was heresy. And they picked up stones to throw at him, and suddenly they could no longer see him. And he left the temple grounds. Just that would have told me something, I think, when somebody just disappears in front of me. Maybe I ought to be paying attention. Let's also look at Isaiah 41:4, please. Whose work is this? Who has brought it about? He who called the generations from the beginning. I, Adonai, am the first, and I am the same with those who are last. In other words, he's going to be the same as he was with Adam as initially created, as he will be with us as we enter the garden. That's really a very similar concept to who was, who is, and who is coming. What we really see here is God states that he's eternal. God stating he's eternal, not subject to or controlled in any way by time. After all, he's the creator of time. There was no time until God created it and set us in it, and it will ultimately go away, and we will strictly be without time, which means eternity beyond that. And this description of God, through this praise, gives the believer an assurance that even though things revealed in the following revelation must take place, and they must, whatever is revealed here must take place, absolutely, we must remember that God is eternal and his power and authority are absolute. Nothing can or will prevail against him, and that his holiness will, as an absolute certainty, triumph over evil. All right, moving ahead. Revelation still in chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. First half of verse 10. And whenever the living beings gave glory, honor, and thanks to the one sitting on the throne, to the one who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fell down before the one sitting on the throne who lives forever and ever and worship him. Remember that the praise of the 4 living beings is continuous. It's day and night. And what happens in this verse is even more extensive or exact statement of the praise being revealed to us. This verse tells us that the praise is not limited to what is said in verse 8, only happening at certain times. The 4 living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to the one sitting on the throne. They do this on an ongoing basis, not continuously, but at certain times interspliced with holy, holy, holy. We have to see that. Whenever at the start of a verse, it would seem certain that the phrase in verse 8 includes part of this, the glory and the honor. This also includes thanks, and when thanks is given, the 24 elders fall down and praise him. What we're seeing here is a brief statement of that praise, and I don't think we can ever conclude that this is the entire praise that these 4 living beings give before God. We're just being given a synopsis of what they do continuously here in these verses. Certainly verse 10 gives support to this thought. There are a lot of references to this giving of glory to the one sitting on the throne who lives forever and ever. So let's look at just a couple of them. Let's go to Psalm 47. I have 47:8. Your translation may say 47:9. But this is in essence of what's going on. God rules the nations. God sits on his holy throne. That's what we've just been looking at through all of what has gotten us up really to this point. God rules the nations. God sits on his holy throne. Now, Deuteronomy 33:3, please. He, God, truly loves the peoples. All his holy ones are in your hands, sitting at your feet. They receive your instruction. It changes in the middle of that. He truly loves the peoples. All his holy ones are sitting in your hand, pointing back to him that loves all the peoples. Sitting at your feet, they receive your instruction. Hebrew does things that drive us nuts trying to translate it into English and make sense. Think of these 4 living beings and the 24 elders as the epitome of worshipers of God. Here is a blessing that Moses spoke over Israel. That thought there is God holding his holy ones in his hand, sitting at his feet, is what's happening in Revelation 4, 9, and 10. Verse 10 gives support to the thought of the worship that's stated here. I'm going to read verses, if you've got them, please, 4, 9, and 10 again. And whenever the living beings gave glory, honor, and thanks to the one sitting on the throne, to the one who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before the one sitting on the throne, who lives forever and ever, and they worship him. Verse 10 gives support to the thought that the worship here is varied. Verse 9 describes a condition that gives rise to the response of the 24 elders. Whenever the 4 living beings gave glory, honor, and thanks to the one sitting on the throne, the 24 elders fell down before him. There's a condition that gives rise to this response of the 24 elders. Notice that in both verses 9 and 10, there's a description of who this worship is directed. This glory, honor, and thanks. It's directed to the one who lives forever and ever. It's mentioned twice. We pay attention. It's mentioned both in conjunction with the actions of the 4 living beings and with the 24 elders. Why should we want to look at that detail? The one sitting on the throne and the one who lives forever and ever? Because of this merging of the one sitting on the throne and the glorified Messiah. They are the ones that are the same. We're going to work more and more into this as we progress through these lessons. The one who lives forever and ever is a different statement from the one who was, who is, and is coming. Relates more to Exodus 3:14, I am, I will be, and so forth. Here in Revelation 4:9, this relates more to Revelation 1:18. So let's look at that. John is seeing the glorified Messiah here. I'm actually going to begin with verse 17, 1:17 and 18. When I saw him, this is the first encounter with the glorified Yeshua after John's been taken up in to get the revelation. When I saw him, I fell down at his feet like a dead man. He placed his right hand upon me and said, Don't be afraid, I am the first and the last, the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys to death and Sheol. You know, we can see a merging of thought here. I believe we can. I think it's significant. I mentioned 2 sites with regard to this thought. I want to mention 2 sites with regard to this thought. Daniel 12:5-7, please. Then I, Daniel, looked, and I saw in front of me 2 others, one on this bank of the river and one on its other bank. One of them asked the man dressed in linen who was above the water, How long will these wonders last? And the man dressed in linen who was above the water of the river raised his right and left hands towards heaven and swore by him that lives forever that it would be a time, times and a half, and that it will be when the power of the holy people is no longer being shattered that all these things will happen. This points to the end of the age. Now, let's take that to Romans 6:9. We know that the Messiah has been raised from the dead, never to die again. Death has no authority over him. As we go on through Revelation, we will see the Lamb, Messiah, and God the Father are separate, but they will be together. They are separate, but they will be together. We have to understand that they are beyond what we can really conceive of. Yes, the Messiah, Yeshua, and God the Creator are different. We can't look at God the Creator directly. We can look at Yeshua the Messiah. Yet, they will be together in the same place at the same time. Which means when we look up and see Yeshua the Messiah physically, we're also seeing the invisible, if you will, through him that is present there, even though we can't see it, if that makes any kind of sense at all. There are these continual inferences to Messiah as part of the Godhead, somehow yet distinct, but somehow the same. Revelation 4:10 and 11, please. The 24 elders, I'm beginning at the start of verse 10 again. The 24 elders fall down before the one sitting on the throne who lives forever and ever and worship him. They throw their crowns in front of the throne and say, "You are worthy, Adonai Eloheinu, to have glory, honor, and power, because you created all things. Yes, because of your will, they were created and came into being." There are the 24 elders. As part of their worship, they perform two acts. They fall down before the one sitting on the throne. At certain times, they prostrate themselves before him as part of their act of praise, an act of complete homage, if you will, an acknowledgement that they are vassals of Adonai. Vassal really is an archaic word for our time, but it fits perfectly. A vassal is defined as one being under the protection of another. A vassal really is defined as one being under the protection of another, and therefore has vowed his complete fidelity and willingly places himself in a subservient and subordinate position. This is the thought here as the 24 elders fall down before the one sitting on the throne and giving him homage. The second thought here is they throw their crowns in front of the throne. Remember what the crowns were? The crowns were gold, but they were not diadems, they were stephanos. They were woven from tree branches and leaves, yet they were appearing in gold in this case. The crown that was given to a victor. It wasn't a political crown of rule, but a crown of overcoming, or being a victor, and they throw these crowns before him on the throne. This is obviously an act of acknowledgement that the one who sits on the throne is the one who reigns, and that all sovereignty must yield to him, and there must be a personal, humble submission to his rule. But also, when they throw these victor's crowns before him, it acknowledges that he is sum and substance of their victory. If it wasn't for him, they wouldn't be victors. Also, this act of submission, which is falling down before him and throwing their crowns before him, is really the opposite of the sin of Satan. Satan didn't do anything even close to this. Many people believe that the sin of Satan is described in Isaiah 14:12 through 15, please. "How did you come to fall from the heavens, morning star, son of the dawn? How did you come to be cut to the ground, conqueror of nations? You thought to yourself, I will scale the heavens. I will raise my throne above God's stars. I will set on the mount of assembly far away in the north. I will rise past the tops of clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Verse 15, "Instead, you are brought down to Sheol, to the uttermost depths of the pit." Wow. "I will make myself like the Most High." This is the opposite of the act of submission seen in the 24 elders, who fell down before him and cast their crowns in front of him. Also interesting, there's a correlation between this and what happened to man at the time of the fall. Genesis 3:4 and 5. "The serpent said to the woman, 'It is not true that you will surely die, because God knows that on the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God.'" See, that's his problem. He thinks he's like God, and he's trying to get people to think the same thing. "Knowing good and evil." If you read Revelation, or read Genesis in the first 3 chapters up to this point, it tells us specifically that our Creator knows no evil. Yeah, it's out there, and he understands it, but he doesn't make it part of himself in any form. So Satan here is really asking the woman, or telling the woman, that you will be like God, knowing good and evil, meaning that you will be like me, who now thinks that he is God replacing the Creator. Anyhow, I got to go away or I'll preach all night on that one. See the correlation between the sin of man and the sin of Satan? The rebellion of man and the rebellion of Satan. In the act of the 24 elders, we have a contrast to that in their complete submission to God. Complete as in total, as in nothing else but submission to God. This is a focus or directing of worship, and that worship is ascribed only to one, that is Adonai, God of heaven's army, the one who is sitting on the throne. He is the only one worthy of receiving glory, honor, and power. Up in verse 9, it says the living beings gave glory, honor, and thanks. That last item is thanks. Here in verse 11, it is changed to power. You have glory, honor, and power. The difference is that in verse 9, it talks about the entire act of worship, giving glory, honor, and thanks. In verse 11, the verbal statement is part of the worship process, glory, honor, and power. The submission of will is in play here. The submission of will is an act of worship. When one submits his will to God, and that's what's being taught here, it's an act of worship. The giving of thanks is an admission of the lack of power to become the victor. Submitting of the individual will to the power of God and thanking Him takes us a step beyond recognition of His power. Satan recognized the power of God but did not thank Him for his position before God. Satan lacked a vital component of the complete worship process, thanking God for who He was and where He was. Instead, Satan aspired to equality with God, and this was his downfall, which he was trying to and was successful in introducing to the human race. He did not submit his will to God at all. And as we go through the book of Revelation, and these coming times are developed for us, it's going to be absolutely essential that the submission of one's will to God be part and parcel of what one does. Otherwise, one will not prevail during this period. This worship statement is directed towards one worthy of glory, honor, and power, who has been defined as the God of heaven's army and is now acknowledged as creator of all things. Why did they sneak that in here, that He created all things? Consider that not only did God create all that is created out of nothing, at least nothing recognizable to us, He did this as an act of His will. But also consider that the continued existence of this creation is also an act of His will. The continued existence of this creation remaining in place is an act of God's will. Because remember when He and Moses had the argument, "Get out of the way, Moses, I'm going to wipe these all out and start in again with you," and Moses talked him out of it? If Moses hadn't talked him out of it, we might not be the sons of Adam. We might be the sons of Moses now. Who knows? The fact is we sit right here in this room right now in a created world, and these elements around us don't dissolve into nothingness, is an act of God's continuing will. We'll see that in chapter 20, when the whole universe flees from existence and no place is found from them. Here, this creation and sustained creation as an act of God's will is brought out. A couple of comments on that. It says, because of your will, they were created and came into being. This is a very fundamental concept. We have to understand the reason that evolution is being pushed the way it is in the school system and in the way the courts are upholding everything. The reason is because to not believe that God created all things would create a spiritual block to further belief, and Satan wants that. Satan wants that. We have to understand that the first words of Holy Scriptures, the first words put down in Genesis 1:1 is that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I'm going to tell you that if you can't believe that, it's going to be very difficult for you to go beyond it. If the adversary can cut man off from this concept that it was God who created all things, he's made major headway. We don't want that. Let's look at something. Go to Acts chapter 14, verses 14 and 15. When the emissaries Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their clothes and ran into the crowd shouting, "Men, why are you doing this? We're just men, human like you. We're announcing good news to you. Turn from these worthless things to the living God who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them." Barnabas and Paul here are in Lystra, and Paul heals a man who can't use his feet. And as soon as he jumps up and starts to walk, the pagan crowd mistook Paul and Barnabas for gods and started to worship them. And Paul's saying here, "Why are you doing this? We're just men like you." And a priest of Zeus brought bulls and wreaths to sacrifice them. And God said, "Stop doing these things. Turn from these worthless things to the living God who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in it." Look at that verse 14 and 15. What did he say? This is a primary basis for belief. These were pagan idolaters that Paul was speaking to. He had to begin the first building block of faith in God. He had to begin with that first building block of faith in God. It was God who made heaven and earth, the sea, and everything that is in them. If that can't be grasped, then it is difficult to believe anything beyond that. Anything of God or Yeshua, anything else. This is where it starts. God is the creator of everything. Turn from these worthless things to the living God who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything that's in them. I'm going to have you go through Isaiah as homework. I know that's a lot of homework. When Israel would go astray, that phrase is uttered over and over again in Isaiah. Israel is reminded that it is the God of Israel that is the creator of all things, all through Isaiah. That's why this was put in here. Because we, as people, tend to miss the obvious. And the fact is that God created and maintains the existence of creation, not for man, but for himself. But for himself. And because of that, we as man win. In spite of the prosperity doctrines that are in the vogue today, it's not that we are here for God to make us prosperous, but we are here like the 24 elders around the throne. Furthermore, I'm going to go through this a little further. God has not abandoned the world, nor the believers, past, present, or future. Actually, this is the world over which he is absolute sovereign with power and authority. The world's very existence right now is a function of his will. All creation is made for his purposes. And in the following pages, it'll be easy to think of evil, that evil is in control. The following pages are going, this is in Revelation, actually illustrate that evil is real, but not in control. Evil is real, but not in control. Now, God's divine purpose cannot and will not be thwarted. The entire chapter that we just went through was, for the most part, to give future believers a true and proper perspective of the way things really are, and not as they may appear from a limited and distorted perspective of men. We have to remember that John was taken into heaven, where God chose to reveal things about himself so that we would not have a distorted view of what was coming. Because, as we look around us, we can see the distorted view that is held by those in time and space. What we're getting here is things as they really are, from God's perspective. This chapter is meant to give encouragement to those that will live during the unfolding of these events that are coming, that we'll see as we continue through the rest of revelation. And we will close with that.